John chapter 21 is where we're going to be today. If you want to turn there. Did you all have a good Memorial Day? Yeah? Thanks for, giving me the space to have a weekend off. I really enjoyed it. Spent a lot of time watching the Memorial Day celebrations going on around the country. And many of them were quite moving and quite inspirational and quite, I don't know what word to put on it. One of the things that they did, though, was made you reflect upon this great nation that we live in and the sacrifices that many gave so that we can do this very thing that we do on a Sunday morning. This is not possible in a lot of parts of the world, and we need to remember that. And as I was scanning through and watching, some videos here and there and some broadcasts, some things, I watched a PBS thing. They had Sam Elliott, and of course I like Sam Elliott, but he was doing a tribute to a gentleman named Ray Lambert. Ray was a World War II veteran that was on Omaha Beach. And he was reading some of what Ray had written. And I'd like to share that with you this morning. Ray writes, "It was total confusion. Shells exploding, boats blowing up, people yelling because they couldn't hear anything. Machine guns, bullet hitting the water all around you. The roar of the boats coming in. It's like you're all alone in a world of 1 million people because you're concentrating on what you have to do. I just kept going. I was thinking only of one thing, getting to the men who needed me." And then Elliot continued, "You did the job you were trained to do. If you didn't, you died." And then he goes on to say in his story that as he got to one injured shoulder, he was a medic, as he got to one injured soldier and picked him up with his good arm, he had already been shot at this point in his other arm, and was trying to carry this gentleman to safety. One of the landing craft came on top of him and shoved him to the bottom. While he was underwater, he prayed. And he prayed this prayer, "Lord, get me out of here." And what he was saying is, he was saying this, "Jesus, I need you to show up." And God answered his prayer. To make a long story short, he was eventually treated and rescued after taking care of many others after that. That had broken his back, but he still took care of others. He was shot again and still took care of others. And by the time he was able to be retreated and moved back to the hospital, God had answered his prayer. God got him out of that particular situation. See, that day Jesus showed up for Ray. See, Jesus showed up after the resurrection not only a couple times, not only once or twice or 2 or 3 times. We know that he showed up as many as 500 times because it's mentioned that 500 different people saw him. And I think the testimony to that showing up is what we see in the church today. The very fact that you are here. Whether you think Jesus is going to show up or not, you're here. Whether you're seeing Jesus today or not, you are here. And I hope that you're expecting that you will have an encounter with him. So what does happen, though, when Jesus shows up? Especially from the biblical story, the biblical narrative. What happens when he shows up? One of those stories that we have is in John chapter 21, and we'll start in verse 1, and let's just work through what happens when Jesus shows up. It said, later, Jesus appeared, keyword again, okay, this isn't the first time, to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened, John shares. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out into the boat, but they caught nothing all night. They caught nothing all night. And the first thing I notice here is Jesus shows up when we are just doing things. We're going to see that Jesus shows up here. But in the midst of our lives, when we are doing things, just as Ray Lambert was doing things that day on Omaha Beach, and those of us doing just life, less significant things as we walk through this journey, sometimes we're going to see that we don't see Jesus in the midst of us. But we're doing what we should do. We're just doing life. We'll learn later that it's referred to that they were actually working. Jesus was crucified. He rose from the dead. The tomb is empty. They've seen Jesus, so these guys are going to work. See, Jesus shows up when we are doing things, and he shows up anytime and any place that we are doing things. You don't need a special moment to have Jesus show up in your life. And that's the beauty about the Lord that we worship. We live in America. We love the spectacular. We love the big. We love the bright lights. We love the billboards and the marquees. We love social media. We love it all because we like big. But in our most mundane circumstances, Jesus can show up. And let's remember that as we work through this. In verse 4, at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. I wrote for this one, Jesus shows up and sometimes we do not see. See, oftentimes when we are going through whatever it is that we are going through, Jesus is there. He says this, one of the last things he said to the disciples, he says, and lo, King James, lo, I will be with you always, period. Do we get that? Jesus is with us who are in Christ always. Not sometimes, not part of the time, not when we're doing everything just right, not when we're striving for perfectionism, not when we're doing this or doing that. Jesus is with us all the time because he said that. Period. I will be with you always. So if you're in a position in your life and you're not seeing him very well, you're wondering what's going on, you're wondering where he is at, Jesus is there. Jesus is there. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out to them, fellows, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. Jesus speaks when we are doing things and don't see. Jesus speaks. Now get the picture here. The disciples just lost their best friend. Okay? They're trying to make their life normal. They're going about their business. They're going to do what they do. They fish. Jesus shows up on the beach. They don't recognize him. Jesus speaks to them. They answer but don't know who they're talking to. See, Jesus speaks when we are doing things and do not see. See, sometimes most of us could not see Jesus working in front of us if God was standing beside us and said, I'm doing a good work in your life. See, most of us couldn't see Jesus sometimes if God said to us, well, Jesus is standing there, but I'm working over here to prepare something for you. It might seem a little boring now, but you just wait and watch and see what's going to happen. Jesus speaks. And he oftentimes speaks through his word. Verse 6. Then he said, this is Jesus, throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some. So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. For this one I put Jesus blesses. When he shows up, Jesus blesses when we are doing things and do not see. See, regardless if we notice that he's there, regardless if we could see him working, Jesus is blessing. And that's the beautiful thing about this story, is that the guys just lost their best friend. They just watched it happen. They watched a cruel death take place. They go to an empty tomb. They're trying to figure all of this out. They got this guy telling them, I'm Jesus and I'm showing up. And they're going to go, well, we really need to work. And so they go to work, we're going to see, and then all of a sudden, Jesus blesses them when we are doing things and when we do not see. Don't ever get in the mindset that Jesus will not bless you if you're just simply going about your life and you don't necessarily see him walking right alongside you. Jesus is blessing you each and every day, period. Regardless of where you're at, the blessing is there. Regardless of what has happened, the blessing is there. Regardless of how you're feeling inside, the blessing is there. In this church, we often talk about that fingerprint of God, and it might just simply be a fingerprint that is the blessing. But God is blessing. God is blessing. Verse 7, if you're working through this with me. Then the disciple Jesus loved, which would be John, then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he puts on his tunic, for he had stripped for work. This is where I get, that he was working. He had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to shore, for they were only about 100 yards from the shore. When Jesus shows up and Jesus starts blessing, it should provoke a response. And notice I use the word should, because not all the time with us on this side of heaven does the blessings of Jesus Christ provoke a response. Now you had two extreme responses here that Jesus didn't even really say one was better than the other. You had Peter, who said, man, my Lord is there. I'm going to get excited about this. I am going to jump out of the boat. I'm going to swim to shore because I want to see him. You got the others who are probably more practical and more pragmatic and said, well, I want to see the Lord, but I got all these fish that he just blessed us with, so we're going to go ahead and row in. We'll get to see Jesus, don't get me wrong. Jesus never criticizes either response. So however God has wired you, he may have wired you to be that excited person that jumps into the water and you're going to go see your Lord, or that more pragmatic, practical person that I got all these fish, we're going to go see Jesus, but we're going to drag the fish with us. Whatever it is, it should provoke a response. But all of them, I can say this, were probably excited. And one thing I've observed about people who walk with Christ, I've observed it in my own life. So I'm not speaking at you, I'm speaking to us. Is that sometimes we've lost our joy. Sometimes we have lost our about encountering the Lord Jesus Christ. Have you ever been there? I have. More times than I would like to admit. There just wasn't a response. I've been blessed abundantly. I've been blessed all over the place, just as many as you've had, because you've shared your story with me. I mean, he blessed me with, and don't tell her this, a beautiful wife. I mean, wonderful woman. I mean, we can make those jokes, but really anybody that can put up with me is a good woman. I'm not the easiest person to live with. All my children, they're awesome. Grandkids, many of you saw the video. If you didn't, we went and visited grandkids last weekend for a couple days, and we got this video of my grandson doing push-ups with me. Some of you questioned whether that was fun. I really enjoyed it, so therefore it was fun. I've been blessed with a great place to live. I've been blessed with a great church family. I could go on and on and on. And sometimes I do, and maybe you too, lose sight of the blessings that God has provided for you. I mean, one of those that we often overlook, the very fact that God gave us the breath of life to come here and worship Him this morning is a blessing. It's a blessing. And it should provoke a response in us. What is your response today? Verse 9. When they got there, notice this. Notice how this is unfolding, okay? They're out in a boat. They're fishing. Let me back up a little bit. Their best friend was just killed. Their best friend's put in a borrowed tomb. Their best friend's tomb is now empty. People are saying that he raised from the dead. Jesus is appearing saying, I raised from the dead. They decided we need to go back to work. So it's nighttime. They go back to work. They're not catching any fish. Very bad night at work. No productivity. You're usually going to lose your job. Jesus says, hey, how's the fishing going? They said, hey, not going very well. Jesus says, throw your net on the other side. Throws the net on the other side. They're productive. They got a big haul. Then they recognize Jesus. Got Peter jumping off the boat because Peter's Peter. You got the other guys rowing the boat in because that's who they are. And they're all going to see Jesus. And when they got there, they found breakfast waiting on them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. So not only does he give them a record catch, he prepared a meal for them. See, when we start talking about the blessings of God, it's just not one blessing. It's blessings in many ways when Jesus shows up. It's never just one blessing when Jesus shows up. He blesses in many ways. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. For this one I wrote, when Jesus shows up, Jesus blesses with abundance. Do you realize that? He blesses with abundance. And I'm not talking a prosperity gospel here or a prosperity doctrine. But what I'm saying here is that his blessing is manifold. His blessing is a blessing of abundance. So not only did they catch some fish, they get to shore and breakfast is waiting for them. But when they count them, they got a boatload of fish. And second, and the last thing, blessing here, their net had not torn. This is huge. Because oftentimes you think, okay, I got this huge blessing, and the blessing ends up costing you money. In this particular instance, it didn't cost any money to those disciples. When we trust in Jesus, he is going to take care of our productivity. He's going to make sure that we catch fish. And he's going to tell us how to do it in his word. He's going to make sure that we recognize him. He's going to make sure that we have a meal prepared for us. And he's going to make sure that it doesn't cost us anything in this particular instance. But he blesses with abundance. Verse 12. Now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. Notice here, when Jesus shows up, Jesus blesses with service. Now let's get the picture here. These guys were doing their thing. They were just out doing things. We found out it was work, but they're doing them things. They're going about their business, and it's not working. They're out on a lake in the middle of the night, And it's a big lake. And think about it. Not in modern terms where we have the lights from the homes around the relay reflecting off the waters. The Sea of Galilee is big. It's big. It would have been dark. It would have probably been lonely. And they're not catching any fish. This guy on shore yells out, "Hey, how you guys doing? We're not doing well. Do this." They catch some fish. They recognize it's Jesus. Peter jumps off the boat. The other guys paddle the boat in. But either way, they all got to see Jesus. When they get there, they found that Jesus blessed them again, had breakfast ready for them. And they found that their equipment had not broke. See, all of this was because Jesus showed up as an act of service. Jesus gave them commandments as an act of service and instruction. Jesus encouraged them along the way as an act of service. And then Jesus himself blessed them with all of his service. Verse 13, then Jesus served them. Jesus served them. When Jesus shows up in our heart, we serve other people. We serve others. And not only with the blessing thing, that's something that oftentimes I will forget. That my Lord served, therefore I serve. So as LaDonna comes up, in verse 14 we read these words. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. The third time. I think he's trying to make a point here. I think he's trying to make a point what we can learn through this short story. See, when Jesus shows up, he speaks when we're doing things and do not see. Don't ever believe that Jesus is not with you. He said this, I will be with you always. Jesus blesses you when you're doing those things that you do not see. Don't forget that this morning. When Jesus shows up and Jesus blesses, it should provoke a response. And I will ask you this question today. What has your response been? Has it been a response of apathy, complacency, malaise, other words I can use? Or are you the Peter type and God's told you to jump out of the boat before and get excited. You've just never really done it. Or are you the more pragmatic type? Well, I get all this. Jesus has blessed me, but I'm going to row the boat to shore. I will see him. God wants you to respond. He wants you to be excited because he showed up in your life. He showed up. Not that he was never there, but he relentlessly pursued you. And he said this to your heart, I want you to be my child. And somewhere along the line, as I'm looking out, I know most of you, so I'll say this with confidence, you responded to that. And you became a child of God because Jesus showed up. What's your response been? We can never forget that Jesus blesses us in many ways. It's never just the one blessing. Usually it's manifold, and it is huge because it comes with abundance. And Jesus blessed through his service. Maybe we should think about that this morning. Because I think he gives us this sometimes. Because sometime earlier, He told the disciples, he said, pray this prayer. Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he send forth workers for service, and for service is my addition, send forth workers, because the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. Let's be challenged to serve today. And let's remember verse 14. This was the third time that Jesus had appeared to his disciples. With many of us, it might read something like this. Jesus appeared to them dozens of times, hundreds of times, and thousands of times. Let's make sure we're looking for Jesus.